Now, what's really interesting is that these folks have cited that the reason that they are thinking about selling their collections is that they fear that future generations will not be interested in comics.
The platform designed by collectors for collectors just got even better. MySlabs.com is proud to now feature dedicated sections for both raw cards and raw comic books. Browse over 100,000 slab collectibles, authenticated by the industry's most trusted grading companies. Then check out a massive selection of sealed wax and now raw singles and raw lots. Join a passionate, no-nonsense community of nearly 50,000 members and enjoy some of the best buyer and seller protection in the business. And as always, MySlabs offers one of the most disruptive pricing models in the hobby, with seller fees as low as only 1%. So the next time you're forced to pay 10%, 20% or more to sell something from your collection, head over to MySlabs.com, the low-fee marketplace by collectors for collectors.
Over the last couple of weeks, I've received some very interesting messages, comments, and emails from people that have basically said that they are thinking about selling off parts or all of their collections. Now, what's really interesting is that these folks have cited that the reason that they are thinking about selling their collections is that they fear that future generations will not be interested in comics. And I'll be completely honest with you, I do not understand this point of view. And I've tried to understand a point of view. And I would say if you're watching this and you share this point of view, please help me to understand. But I do not necessarily get it. And in this video, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that. So one of the things that I kind of struggle with is that we don't know what the future holds. We don't know what's going to happen next year, much less 30 years from now. The same way that the people 30 years ago could never have predicted what we are experiencing right now. So this idea of selling a collection because of the unknown future, I don't necessarily get that. But I should also mention that if you are of the belief that you want to sell your collection, you should. I personally don't think that I'm in a position to tell anybody what they should be doing with their collections, but I will challenge people's thoughts. I will challenge some of the things that they throw out there just so that people can think a little bit about it, so that they can hear a contrarian point of view. And that's where this video comes from. It's a contrarian point of view, not necessarily to say that you're doing something wrong or should do something different. But again, I don't quite get this. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if either one of my children are going to be interested in comics, but that does not stop me from buying comics for them. It does not stop me from building a really awesome collection that I hope to be able to give to them. If they're not into it, that's perfectly fine. They can sell the collection. It's actually in my will that gives them that out to do that should they not want the collection at all. But this idea of selling one's collection for fear of the future is something that I honestly struggle with. Again, because we cannot predict what the future will actually be. But let's take it a step further. Let's say that you do fear that the next generation of collectors won't be there. The question that I would ask people is, what are you doing about it? What are you doing to change that? Are you just sitting by and waiting and watching what's going to happen? Or are you going to take an active role? What I mean by that is that if you fear that future generations won't be interested in comics, what can you do to help the next generation be interested in comics? Can you give comics away to kids? Can you give comics or donate comics to a local school or to a library? There are lots of things that we are empowered to do as collectors and as individuals. We literally can share the passion that we have for comics with the next generation so as to allow them to understand how awesome this hobby is. As an example of that, I had an opportunity not that long ago to speak to a middle school class, and I was able to talk with them about my passions, my interest in this hobby. And I don't know if any of those kids will ever read a comic, but my point is that I am doing something to ensure that the next generation, future generations of people will have some awareness of comics, and maybe some of them will actually pick up a comic or two. Another point that I want to make is that I recently saw some data that pointed to the fact that there could be as many as 1.5 million people that actively purchase comics here in the United States. And I don't know how accurate this data is, to be honest with you. It was an insider's back of the envelope type of calculation based upon sales data, right? So I don't know. It's a little squishy, but let's just assume that it's right. 1.5 million people that are actively buying comics on an ongoing basis. That is not the number of people that are reading comics. That's the number that are buying. And so those numbers are probably slightly different. But 1.5 million people buying comics, reading comics, collecting comics. We cannot assume that all of those people are old. Can't assume that they're all old, and we certainly can't assume that they're all going to stop collecting and basically die, right? So 1.5 million, you have to have a range of ages in there from younger to older. The point here is that all of these people are going to continue collecting comics. Each one of these people has a sphere of influence. They have children, they have other people that they touch that they are influencing and probably informing about the hobby of comics. So you have a network that is essentially spread across the country that is potentially growing through influence. The number of people that are exposed to, potentially read, and potentially buy comics. Now we can probably assume that of that 1.5, a healthy number of them are older, right? We can probably make that assumption. And so folks will say, well, younger people aren't buying comics. You're probably right about that. As a young person, I didn't have many friends that actually bought comics, but that doesn't mean that comics were not bought for them. That does not mean that they did not read comics. And a lot of folks will say, well, I don't see kids in comic shops. Okay, I never saw kids in comic shops when I was a kid. I never saw other children unless I was going in there with them. You don't necessarily have to see a kid in a comic shop for the next generation to have some exposure and interest in comics. And I've cited in previous videos what is actually happening with Scholastic. Scholastic is the biggest monopoly around, to be honest with you. They have the ability to literally put graphic novels in the hands of school-age children. And I always cite Dog Man as an example of a graphic novel that is out there. It's about a dog that is a police officer that essentially is protecting his city. If that doesn't sound like a superhero comic, I don't know what it is, right? Graphic novel is nothing but a fancy term for a comic book, and Dog Man is nothing but a surrogate for Superman or some other superhero. Dog Man, I do believe in 2021 sold like 1.6 million copies of a single volume. When you look at the top 20 graphic novels in 2021, 8 of them were Dog Man. There were a healthy number of manga as well, and a manga is a type of comic. All of these graphic novels are by and large geared towards the younger generation, school-age children. So it doesn't matter whether you're seeing a kid in a comic shop or not. Children are being exposed to comics and graphic novels in a number of different ways. Taking it a step further, you cannot exist potentially on planet Earth without having some exposure to superheroes, right? In the form of merchandise, movies, and also TV shows. It is literally everywhere. If you turn on Disney Plus, a ton of content on Disney Plus, and even on YouTube for that matter, is geared towards the younger generation and cartoons derived from source material of comics. My point here is that you honestly should not fear what's going to happen in the future. Because 1, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. 2, you have an ability to actually shape it, and to some degree or another, the future will take care of itself. With that said, I'm going to wrap this video up. I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch. I encourage you to sound off in the comment section. If you worry about the future generation, let me know what you're thinking. If you're not worried, let me know why you're not thinking. Potentially, you're a parent that's raising some good kids that are going to be into comics. Potentially, you're a teacher that is using comics to educate your students. And let's never forget that comics are actually part of college curriculums now, which is mind-blowing. Talk about not being able to predict the future. Who saw that coming? Anyway, sound off in the comment section. I am always interested in hearing what you all's thoughts are, no matter where you land on a side of an argument. If you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so on Instagram at Regie Collects. Take care.